On July 16th of the year 1054, Cardinal Humbert, representing the Catholic Church, walked into the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Patriarch Michael was preparing for the liturgy when Humbert placed a document before him, then turned and left the great church and the city, bound for Rome. The document declared that the Patriarch of Constantinople had been excommunicated by the Pope himself. That very same day, Patriarch Michael gathered a council of his own and responded in kind, excommunicating those who had excommunicated him. Thus, July 16, 1054, was recorded as the date when the Eastern and Western churches officially broke apart, an event remembered by historians as the Great Schism. But this was not simply about one dramatic day. The roots of the conflict stretched back centuries. Throughout the Middle Ages, one of the central disputes among Christian leaders was the question of authority. Which church held universal supremacy? The popes of Rome claimed this supremacy for the Western Church. Their reasoning was clear. Peter, one of Christ's apostles, had come to Rome, founded a church there, and died as a martyr. According to the papacy, Peter was the first bishop of Rome, and all who followed him sat in the papal seat as his successors. Christ himself, they argued, had named Peter as the foundation of the church. Paul, another great missionary, also came to Rome and, like Peter, was martyred there. The bones of both apostles, it was said, rested beneath the Vatican. In the eyes of Rome, this was proof enough that their church stood upon the blood of the two greatest saints of Christianity, giving the Roman bishop unquestionable universal authority. The Eastern Church saw it differently. Their claim to supremacy was grounded not in martyrdom, but in imperial power. Constantinople was the capital of the empire, the seat of the emperor. In pre-Christian Rome, emperors had been considered the heads of religious authority, and when the capital was moved eastward to Constantinople in the 4th century, that tradition followed. For the Eastern Church, the argument was simple. Wherever the emperor resided, that church should be supreme above all others. Thus, emperors like Constantine, Theodosius, and Justinian were seen as possessing authority over both state and religion. This rivalry for dominance persisted throughout the Middle Ages and played a central role in driving the two churches further apart. It was less about which side had the stronger reasoning and more about who would hold power over the Christian world. And as the centuries passed, the conflict was shaped not only by politics, but also by deep cultural differences. One of the greatest problems dividing the Eastern and Western churches was language. When the Roman Empire split in the year 395, the division was not only political, but also cultural. In the West, Latin culture prevailed, while in the East, Greek culture dominated. The Western Church officially used Latin, but in the East, Greek was the language of the clergy and the faithful. By the 5th century, even the emperors themselves had abandoned Latin and begun speaking and writing in Greek. Over time, this language barrier became a major obstacle. It meant that theological debates were nearly impossible to follow. For example, in the 5th century, a letter sent from Constantinople to Rome might remain unanswered for months simply because no one in Rome could translate it. And in turn, messages sent from Rome were often dismissed in Constantinople as nothing more than barbarian Latin, not even worth translating. By the 9th century, some Eastern clerics openly mocked the Pope, claiming that he spoke the tongue of barbarians and therefore could never claim authority over Constantinople. Another source of tension was theology itself, specifically the doctrine of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the early years of Christianity, emperors convened councils to resolve disputes. The first of these was held in the year 325 at Nicaea by Emperor Constantine. Later, in the year 381, the Council of Constantinople declared that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father alone. But in the year 589, at the Council of Toledo, the Western Church altered this formula, proclaiming that the Spirit came from both the Father and the Son. Their aim was to elevate the role of Christ, protecting him from heretical interpretations. At first, the Eastern Church remained unaware of this change due to the language divide. But when the news finally reached Constantinople years later, their response was uncompromising. They denounced the Western formula as heresy. Historians call this dispute the Filioque controversy, from the Latin words meaning "and the Son." In the earliest centuries, there was no strict hierarchy among the churches. Their relationship was more about exchanging information than enforcing authority. But as councils made decisions, certain churches were elevated above others, granted special privileges over their regions. These were Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, together known in the East as the Pentarchy, or Rule of Five. Initially, Rome held priority among them. Yet over time, emperors sought to strengthen Constantinople's importance, drawing other patriarchs to their side and claiming more authority. This inevitably deepened the divide between East and West. In the early years, popes were forced to submit to imperial power, even needing the emperor's approval to take the papal throne. For centuries, papal authority and imperial politics remained entangled. In the year 726, Emperor Leo III of Byzantium banned the veneration of images and icons of Christ and the saints. This movement, known as iconoclasm, was fiercely opposed by Pope Gregory, who drafted a letter declaring that anyone who participated in such acts was excommunicated. But the messengers never reached Constantinople. They were arrested in Sicily, which was under Byzantine control. Then, in the year 751, the Lombards seized several cities in northern Italy, threatening Rome itself. This moment marked a turning point in the history of the Catholic Church. The Pope appealed to Pepin, king of the Franks, for help. A devout man, Pepin welcomed the call, marched into Italy, and defeated the Lombards. His generosity did not end there. He declared that the lands stretching from Rome to Ravenna would be given to the papacy. From that moment on, the Pope was not only the supreme spiritual leader of the West, but also the ruler of a temporal state in central Italy. This was a milestone in Christian history. The process continued in the year 800, when Pepin's son, Charlemagne, was crowned emperor by the Pope himself. At that time, the Byzantine throne was held by a woman, Empress Irene. Tradition insisted that only a man could be emperor. Thus, with Charlemagne's coronation, the imperial title seemed to pass to the West, shifting supremacy away from Constantinople. Even after Irene was deposed in the year 802 and replaced by Emperor Nikephoros, neither the papacy nor the Franks were willing to give up their claim to the empire. The division grew deeper. The final break came in southern Italy. For centuries, much of the region had been under Byzantine control, but beginning in the 11th century, it fell step by step into the hands of Norman conquerors loyal to the Catholic Church. Yet in these churches, Eastern rites continued to be practiced. In the year 1053, the Pope issued a decree. All churches in the region must adopt the Latin rite or be closed. The East reacted with fury. Patriarch Michael retaliated by closing all Latin churches in Constantinople. What began as a dispute over ritual exploded into a diplomatic crisis. To resolve the matter, the Pope dispatched a delegation led by Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople in the summer of 1054. From the very beginning, the talks went badly. Humbert presented a letter urging Michael to submit to papal authority, and his arrogant demeanor only deepened the tension. The Patriarch, insulted, refused to receive him again. After weeks of hostility, Humbert's patience ran out. On the morning of July 16th, he entered the Hagia Sophia and placed a papal bull of excommunication upon the altar. That act was the breaking point. Patriarch Michael, backed by his council, excommunicated Humbert and his delegation in return. The Eastern and Western churches had finally and fully split. At first, the faithful scarcely noticed. Christians of East and West continued to live side by side, maintaining friendly relations. But over time, the growing rift between the churches filtered down to the people themselves. The Crusades brought tensions to a peak, culminating in the year 1204 when Latin crusaders captured and sacked Constantinople. Attempts at reconciliation were made across the centuries, but they rarely succeeded. The divide between East and West remained, echoing even into the present day.